Well, it's a story that follows two different dogs, and the way it's written, you get to actually see the emotions of the dogs, and you have an explanation through the narration how the dogs are feeling at different times when things are happening. And so you can sort of see or understand the dog's perspective in a way that a professional like me could see if they were watching the same scene. And then you get to see all of the difficulties that those dogs have and the good things that happen in their lives from their perspective. But then also you can see how the humans interpret things as well and where they get it right, but also where they get it wrong. And a lot of the things that the humans in the book struggle with are things that I've noticed that my clients and dog owners that I know struggle with as well.
Hello, humans and puggies. Welcome to the Pug Life Show, brought to you by Pug Parties. Because your pug deserves to be the best dressed at the party, and you can check out their outfits at pugparties.com. I'm your host, Donna, and with me are my grumbly puggy co-hosts, Rosie and Kenji. It's not often that I gush about a book of any kind, so when I do come across a book that I not only enjoy reading, but I also get a lot out of it when it comes to understanding my puggies, I gush to everyone. And then I ask for the author to come on the Pug Life Show so we can talk about it in detail. Dr. Dennis Wormald's book, A Dedication to Difficult Dogs, a heartwarming tale shedding light on canine mental health, is a must-read for every Pug Pawrent out there. It doesn't matter if your pug has anxiety or not. This book helped me understand what might be going on in Rosie and Kenji's heads, not to mention the rescue puggies that I care for, like on a daily basis. And thanks to that, I feel like I'm a better pug mum for it. This episode is jam-packed with insightful information on how pugs/dogs tick, backed by science and years of experience, and we barely covered a quarter of what the book offers. So before we zoom in, I want to remind you to subscribe to our newsletter in the show notes so you get advance notice of our next episode and much, much more. Hello, Dennis. Thank you so much for coming on the Pug Life Show to talk about your book and the amazing research and outcomes. I just absolutely loved it. Cannot say how much I loved your book.
You're welcome. Yeah, I loved writing it. It was a labor of love. It took quite a few years to get through. And yeah, I'm happy with the product. I think I've got a lot of really good feedback, so that speaks for itself. Yeah.
Yes. So I was gushing before we actually hit record, and I'm going to gush slightly again so that the humans and puggies out there can understand just how much I loved your book, which is called A Dedication to Difficult Dogs, a heartwarming tale shedding light on canine mental health, which is actually quite close to my heart, noting that Kenji, who is one of the pugs that own this podcast, is on fluoxetine because he has anxiety because of his previous life, I suppose, for want of a better term. I loved the book. I would have devoured it in a day if I had the chance. Unfortunately, it took me a week, and I'm now on my second reading and of course, already started to put some of the things that you talk about in the book in practice and already seeing results, which is just incredible. I know that sort of you say in your book that positive reinforcement is a slow process. I was kicking goals very quickly. So it could be because pugs are so food orientated.
Definitely helps a lot. I think it's so variable from dog to dog how fast you'll see improvement for whatever you're looking at. And all you got to do is give it a try and know that at least if you're doing things the right way, at least you're doing no harm. And I think that's really important when you're living with a dog that you love, that you want to get along with, or fostering a dog. The first rule should be do no harm. Just like in medicine, you're having a relationship with the dog. You don't want to ruin that relationship in any way or form. You want to be their friend, not their master, if that makes sense.
And it is, I suppose it goes against the grain. I grew up in a house of hunting dogs. My father trained them, retrievers. And so although they were treated really well because they were a member of the working family, they were not pets. So they didn't come into the house. They weren't treated as such. And those training techniques is what I learned so that when I got my first pug many years ago, 20 years ago, those were the techniques that I used with my pug, Fat Dog, Lewis, my first one. And as I was saying before, There were moments as I was reading the book where I felt shame absolutely wash over me as I realized that some of those techniques, which probably didn't help Fat Dog because he'd been rescued from a family that hadn't looked after him. And it's 2020 vision in hindsight, but I suppose it's one of those, it's a tale of caution to anyone who reads it, and I recommend everyone does, is that there are going to be points in the book where you're going to read something and you're going to go, oh my God, I did that. And because I now understand what that does, I feel really bad.
Yeah, I try to let people know easily, and I say at the very start of the book, like, there is
Yes.
no judgment at all. If you don't know something, you don't know it, and it's like, I'm a new parent at the moment, and, one of the other mothers in the mothers group was saying that with her child, she had not realized for the first few weeks she had to wash under the armpit. She'd been doing everything right. She'd been trying her hardest to look after this baby so well. And one of the nurses was actually really mean to her. They saw the armpits were a bit red and they said, "What have you done? Like, you haven't washed your baby properly." And she just felt terrible. And I'm like, look, she's doing her best. She's got a lot on her plate right now.
Yeah.
And the poor thing, like, she's missed one little spot. And she's trying so hard, and owners are the same with their dogs. I think they try so hard, and it's not your fault if you don't know what you don't know. There's a lot of crap out there, a lot of stuff
Mm.
that you will hear, advice that is really actually not useful at all. I grew up watching Caesar Milan, and my first dog, I feel shame about what I did with I had a
Yes.
beagle, and I feel ashamed that I used to roll this beagle onto his back when I was just a kid myself. I didn't know any
Yeah.
better. But that's what people were doing back then, and I think it's no one's fault. It's just bad situation of what the state of knowledge has been in the past. And yeah, we need to change it. We need to spread the word, Donna. We got to
Yes.
get it out there.
Absolutely. I am definitely reformed.
Yeah.
So, but before we get into, it was really difficult to choose a couple of topics to cover in the podcast, but it just means that people need to go and read the book. So I tried to pick ones that were probably more immediately handy for the pug community, and especially people who have rescue pugs that may have come from an environment that wasn't as supportive as it could have been, because it'll definitely help that transition as they're coming into a new family, to help the family understand why the pug is behaving the way they are. So, but before we get to that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Give us the
Yeah.
deets.
So I'm a veterinarian, but I've done a lot of extra research in dog behavior. I have a PhD on dog behavior, and I work doing dog behavior cases as a vet. So there's something called a behavior veterinarian, if you haven't heard of them. I'm not technically a behavior specialist, but essentially they're just someone that's done a lot more training than me on the clinical side. But I've done a little bit of everything, a bit of research, a bit of clinical. And so, yeah, I work in Melbourne and I see dogs for all sorts of behavioral issues. And I run a website as well that gives dog behavior advice through vet clinics. And also, I wrote the book, yeah, Dedication to Difficult Dogs. And yeah, I'm a new dad, so I've got a 8-month-old boy, and yeah, that's where I'm at in life at the moment, Donna.
Bit crazy, glutton for
Yep.
punishment. And you're a fur dad too? Not to a pug, but that's okay.
Yes, I have a Labrador. I call her my golden angel because she's a yellow lab, and I just think she's perfect. I think the sun shines out of her butt.
Don't we all? Our fur babies, definitely. They're like, even my partner used to say, like, the pugs are number one and I'm number two, to which my response is, and what's wrong with that? So,
Yep. Yeah, if you treat your number 1, your dog, that well, being number 2 can still be very well treated. Oh.
absolutely. I said, "You still get cuddles and kisses? What's wrong?" Like, and there's no meaty breath involved.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the inspiration behind the book? Because it was obviously a trigger.
Yeah, a few different inspirations. I've always loved teaching aspects of science and science education. And because I've really loved the brain and how the brain works, I did neuroscience originally before vet and really loved teaching vet students about dog behavior. I really found that as I was teaching, I guess my clients, dog behavior advice and theory, I found that I've always really enjoyed the teaching part of it. Yeah, I'm passing on that knowledge and finding different and inventive ways to teach rather than just putting out a manual of like facts. I
Yeah.
really like finding different ways, and I love using metaphors and analogies and things like that to explain things. And so I started writing a book and it evolved a lot. It's not what it was to begin with. There was no story at all in it originally, but I found that for a lot of people, using story in learning is actually a very powerful tool. And so it really suited me and because otherwise I end up putting a million analogies in. I could just do one. The story part of it is just like one big long analogy, like
Yeah.
one big long, explanation of, hey, this is what's happening and this is why we do it the way we do it and this is what works and this is what doesn't. And so yeah, that combination of that plus with the theory as well, I found was yeah, really nice way of giving people a lot of information without them feeling like they're reading a textbook.
Hmm.
Mm.
No, I agree. Well, quickly give us a précis of the book before we sort of dive into a couple of the key areas.
Yeah, sure. So it's two things. So it's a story that follows two different dogs, and the way it's written, you get to actually see the emotions of the dogs, and you have an explanation through the narration how the dogs are feeling at different times when things are happening, and so you can sort of see or understand the dog's perspective in a way that a professional like me could see if they were watching the same scene. And then you get to see all of the difficulties that those dogs have and the good things that happen in their lives from their perspective. But then also you can see how the humans interpret things as well and where they get it right, but also where they get it wrong. And a lot of the things that the humans in the book struggle with are things that I've noticed that my clients and dog owners that I know struggle with as well. And so essentially we're following the story of Alan and Nella, these two different dogs. It's a Little Dachshund and Irish Wolfhound. And we are just following along their stories and watching to see what happens when they go through difficulties. And yeah, I won't give away too much, but it sounds like not much, but there's a lot in there, a lot packed in there.
There is, and I have to I liked the fact that each chapter was sort of condensed into one key message, I suppose, for want of a better term. And you had that storyline of both of them, how each dog was sort of living through that particular situation. And at the end, you talking about this is the research that's been done, this is what we've discovered so far, this is the reason why we're saying do this and not do this or X, Y, and Z. It was just some of the research that I learned just blew my mind, and we are going to talk about that in a second because it never occurred to me that was the case, and so it made it really easy, as you said, like I sort of over that sort of 7-day reading cycle, I could read a chapter and then go and do something, and then when I had like an hour, I could then sit back down and have another chapter read, and even with the end of chapter analysis, like it didn't take away from the story for me personally. So, and for me, it helped process what had sort of happened in the chapters. There were times when I read the chapter and went, "Oh my god, I used to do that, and I am a really bad pug mum." Even though I know that I didn't know any better at the time, I still cringed. I mean, even things like I remember one of my second pug, Winston, who was a black pug, and I don't know if you know pugs too well, but in my experience, black pugs are always the naughtier ones. I shouldn't say naughtier, mischievous, like, and Winston was the king of doing naughty things. He just couldn't help himself. And I remember being told to use a spray bottle. And to be honest, it didn't work with him. It didn't work. So actually, I think it probably worked the first 2 or 3 times, and then it just didn't work. And so sort of reading about that part, like using a spray bottle, I thought I would never go so far as using a shock collar. That was always a big no-no for me, but it was all these little things that just keep going through going, that was my upbringing, my antiquated training from what happened 20 years ago. And even now, my dad doesn't train dogs anymore. He's too old. But we have these conversations around the way he used to train his dogs as to the way they're trained these days. And there are times when he says stuff and I just look at him and go, I need to remember that was how they trained dogs 40 years ago, not, and
Yeah.
we didn't know any better back in those days. So,
Yep. So back then, I think it was all about worrying about the outcome. So caring about what the dog did not how the dog felt at all. And you can absolutely get a dog to do the same thing through, using a carrot or a stick. And so either with punishment or with reward, you can get a dog to act the same way. And I think we have a better understanding now of the sentience of animals and the welfare of animals. And we really do understand that, their emotional parts of their brain are just pretty much the same as ours. We like to think we're all highly evolved as humans and, superior species, but the emotional part of our brain is like still the same as a crocodile brain. Like we haven't gone any further. When we, get all upset or angry or happy, those emotions that we're feeling, like that's no different to the other mammals out there. So yeah, I think we now understand that and we realize that, hey, just like with people, how you could hold a gun to someone's head and make them do just about anything, right? But we all know that that is a terrible thing to do. And
Yes.
it's just goes without saying. But back then, it didn't really matter how you made it happen because didn't dogs didn't really have those feelings. We didn't have to worry about their welfare back then because they were more like objects, I'd have to
Mm.
say, rather than actual living sentient beings.
Well, legally, they're still classed as chattel, the same as a chair. So,
Yeah.
which is another story that we will not
Yeah.
go into today. Um,
No, that would open a whole can of worms.
oh, yes. But what you just said, we are going to come back to that. So, but the first thing I'm going to say is I want to talk about anthropomorphism, and I
Yeah.
practiced this morning to make sure I said it properly.
I'm impressed. I don't know if I can say it that well.
So what is it, and why is it so important for our relationship with our dogs?
Anthropomorphism is a really natural, normal thinking pattern that all humans actually have. It's the propensity for us to assume that others think the way that we think, and across the species barrier, though. So it's just like how we assume that if we see someone do something, we can guess why they're doing it because we know why we might do the same thing. So if you see someone, suddenly scream and jump and then hold their foot, for example, you might think, oh, they've hurt their foot because I do that if I hurt my foot, right? And we also do that across the species barrier. So if we see a dog scream and then lift up their paw and lick their paw, we might think, oh, well, they've hurt their paw, right? And so that's anthropomorphism. And in a sense, it can be correct and good in some situations, like that situation with a dog licking its paw and holding it up. Yeah, probably did just hurt its paw, right? But the problem is that while some things are the same, there's a lot that's very different in our brains and the way they work. And knowing what's the same and what's not the same is key to understanding where it's okay to anthropomorphize and think of dogs as little people and where it's not okay to think of dogs as little people, because it all has to do and comes down to the way their brains work and the way their brains are different to ours. So I think it is a very good thing to anthropomorphize and think, okay, this dog looks really scared. I know what it's like for me to be scared. That feels horrible. So I'm going to ascribe that to the dog and say the dog probably feels pretty bad too if they're scared. I think that's a
Mm.
great example of where anthropomorphism is really good and useful because it fosters empathy. And then that means we're going to be more caring and, more more caring for animals, and their welfare is going to be better because of it. But then, unfortunately, there's other situations where we anthropomorphize where it's not helpful and not useful. And one of the big problems that I notice a lot is people assuming that dogs can think quite complicated thoughts that actually they're not thinking like that at all. They're actually thinking very simply about things. So it can lead people, for example, to believe that a dog knows that it did something wrong and they know that they've done something bad, when really maybe they were just acting on instinct and we're assuming that they know that they have done the wrong thing when actually they haven't at all. And so there's an example in the book, I think, about some research that's been done around guilt in dogs. I don't know if I mentioned that one or not. I can't remember now. I'll go over it now anyway. So,
Mhm.
um,
Please.
so they did some research where they looked at dogs and they had them do something that they were told not to do. So there was some food left in a room or something like that. I can't remember the details, but essentially the main part of the experiment was the owner coming back into the room and seeing the dog, and the owner was either told that the dog did the wrong thing or that the dog didn't do the wrong thing. And regardless of whether the dog did the wrong thing or not, it was the human's response and how they talked to the dog when they came in the room that caused the dog to act what the owner thought was guilty or not. So
Mm.
essentially, if the owner thought the dog was guilty, the dog acted guilty.
Yep.
Even though I don't believe, and like research shows, dogs don't actually feel guilt. What we see is the dog acting guilty, which is actually appeasement. It's actually the dog just trying to essentially say, "Don't hurt me. I really don't want to be hurt by you. I'm going to act like I'm no threat." And people normally will tell their dog off when they think their dog's done something wrong, and so their dog learns to act appeasing, act fearful, and big puppy dog eyes, like lowering their body down, like maybe rolling on their back. And the owner thinks, "Oh, look, they're guilty. See, they know they did something wrong." But really, the dog's just
They're just
responding to
reacting.
your body language or knowing that you're about to get them in trouble. It's that much. It's that
And
simple.
it's what I loved, there was the section in the reflections part was one of the things that blew my mind, was the fact that they don't know morals because that part of their brain is not developed like ours, and that effectively we need to look at our pugs like we would look at a 6-month-old child because they don't have the ability, they have the very limited ability to communicate, and they never go beyond that 6-month-old mindset of what's right or wrong. It's just that, as I said, that just blew my mind because I was just sort of like, "Oh," and even now, like, since I've read the book, they've one of my fosters has a little bit of a habit when he's a bit lazy, he won't go outside to go to the toilet, and so we'll find little messages waiting for us. I have to laugh. He likes to use my partner's office. I'm okay with that. There's something in there that obviously he likes. And I go to say to him, "No, Wally, that's bad." And then I go, "You can't, Donna. He's got no idea what you're talking about."
He doesn't understand good and bad. He doesn't understand he's done
No.
something wrong. He does understand he's done something that means that you yell at him, and he might not
Yeah.
like being yelled at, and so he might try to do things to not get yelled at, but he doesn't understand that he did something that you didn't want and that made you feel bad. Because that's requiring him to understand, a theory of mind that you have your own thoughts and on all of that, and it's just something we really take for granted because we all understand it, and we have since we can remember. You can't remember before you're like 5 years old or something as a
Mm.
human. So we can't remember what it was like to experience the world without understanding all this basic knowledge that we actually took us at least 5 years to learn. So yeah, I think that it's tough because sometimes also as owners, if your dog does something that really upsets you, it's hard not to snap sometimes. Like you're only human. If they've done like just chewed up a really expensive, piece of clothing or,
Uh-huh.
gone to the toilet in a position that you really don't like, it's hard not to be a bit upset. But I think although it's fair enough for us to have that response, taking out on the dog is not the right way to go about it.
No, and I mean,
Yeah.
and so I find, like, I sit there and I go, "Ugh, I can't." But even I've caught him doing it, like, in front of me, the little bugger, he did it
Yeah.
the other day. And I've just gone, "Wally, no." And then he stopped and looked at me, but he didn't run outside and finish. And so I just went, "Ah, Donna, you know what you have to do? Get the treat bag, go outside with him, get him to go to the toilet outside, and then give him a treat so he remembers." But it was just it's such an instant response that you don't
Yeah.
even being aware of it. It's sort of, I mean, the great thing is now I mean, not that I ever really yelled because I just sort of went, "Well, they've piddled. The time's
Yeah.
gone. It's like
Yeah.
done and dusted. All you can do is keep encouraging the better behavior." But it was just,
Yeah.
I did have a giggle to myself when I stopped myself from screaming because I
Yeah.
just went, "What does it matter? It's not gonna."
He's not gonna learn. You've done it however many
6-month-old
times
baby.
before that, and he's still going there, right? It's obviously not working. You may as well stop. You can distract the behavior halfway through by, clapping your hands and saying, "Come on, come here, boy, come on." And just the distraction of like kind of calling him over there and making a big loud noise, it doesn't scare them, but it can cause them to stop halfway through. So that's my way
Yeah,
around. Like you're not telling them
redirect.
off and then redirect them, take them outside.
Right.
Exactly, and yeah, with toileting in the wrong spot, it is tough trying to get ahead of it and take them out when you know they're probably gonna need to go before they
Mm.
actually are really busting, and getting ahead of it and emptying them out regularly, almost going back to toilet training, the first principles of when you have a little puppy. It's a good
As soon
way to
as
go
they
about it.
wake up, as soon as I've had something to eat, yeah, all of those
Yeah,
sort of things sort of, but it was so because we've had him for 4 months, and so he'd had this great period where he didn't do anything, and then he's had a couple of days, and I thought to myself, "I wonder if we've had a lot going on," as I was saying, we're organising a fundraiser, so a lot of stuff's happening around the pug rescue, and I do wonder if just the all of the disruption has just got him a little bit worked up, and that's why he's sort of falling back into
Mm.
those original behaviours.
Possibly, and also it's pretty cold at the moment as well.
Yes, I do.
Some dogs don't like getting their feet wet, and I think it's a terrible excuse for not
Oh,
going outside,
that's
but
that's a pug through and through, like, it always makes me laugh. They won't go outside when it's raining, but I've just mopped the floors, and they're happy to tromple all the way
I know,
over wet
right?
floors.
Oh, please.
It's the mindset sometimes that I just think,
Yep.
"Why?" And I just have to say to it, "6-month-old child, 6-month-old child." Um, the other thing that was really interesting for me, and it kind of leads into the next bit we were talking about interpreting a dog's behavior, was the fact that a dog's limbic system is the same as a human's, so they do feel emotions to the same depth as us.
Absolutely, they do, and, it sounds like it all sounds like pretty. Like, to me at least, it sounds normal, like, and expected, but I think it's important in noting that, like we were saying before, that a lot of our training practices came from before this was known. So, it actually wasn't common knowledge 20, 30 years ago. People thought that they were very different and that they didn't feel and experience emotions the same as we do. But although they feel the same emotions, well, they absolutely do, they display them in a different way. They show different body language, like we'll talk about later, and they deal with their emotions in different ways to us.
Which is the next lead in, we were talking about pain, and I've had a similar thing where I've literally said to my vet or my vet specialist, they haven't shown any indication that they're in pain. And in the book, you talk about the fact that it's actually not part of their DNA, for want of a better term.
Yeah, so humans have got all these things that are strange about humans that when you compare them to different animal species across the kingdom. So we're a very unique species for a lot of ways, obviously. And one of them is that we like to complain. Like, complaining is actually
Very
not
good at it.
a very common behavior in the animal world. If you're complaining, it's actually a sign of weakness. It's showing that there's something wrong. Maybe you're unwell, you're not fit, you might be taken advantage of. For predators, they might be able to come and hunt you if you're showing signs of being in pain. If you're trying to jostle for, like, a social position or show that you're strong for a mate, you don't want to show you're in pain or that you're weak and complain. But humans are complaining left, right, and center. For some reason, that
Yep.
rule's gone out the window with us, hasn't it?
And it leads back to the anthropomorphization,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
um, of us versus our dogs. And so it was another thing where I just sat there and went, "My God, I don't know how many times," but similarly, you talk about the fact that parents will go into the vet and say, "There's just something not right. I don't know what it is,
Mm.
but something is just not right." And it's
Mm.
because and I'd had a similar situation with my pug Winston, who he had a number of health issues before he passed over about 12 months. And he'd had surgery, then he got pneumonia. We got him over the pneumonia, but there was still something not right, and we were going in for the post pneumonia checkup. And I sat there with a specialist and I said, "Look, I get that you're the internal medicine dude. And I said, but I'm sorry, he's not Winston." And you actually say that in the book where parents have come in and said, "It's not Winston."
Mm.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
and it's just incredible.
it's really incredible. I think what people are doing is they're picking up on the body language, but they don't know what they're picking up on exactly. They know their pets really, really well, and they know that there's something not right, but they don't know how to interpret what they're seeing. All they know is that something's different.
Yes.
There's
And
something different. Don't know what it is.
you second guess yourself. You sort of sit there thinking to yourself, am I overcooking this?"
Mm.
And I have to admit, I did. I was quite lucky. The specialist was at least kind enough to say, okay, if you think something's not right, let's do some more tests. And thank God we did, because we did find that he had a antibiotic resistant bacteria in his lungs, which was why he got pneumonia and why he wasn't completely over it. So
Yeah.
that then sort of spurned us down another few months worth of additional medication, other bits and pieces. So, but when I was reading that story, that particular instance just popped into my head immediately, where I just went, I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And thank God I did, because if I hadn't, he would have been dead within a month. So,
Yeah. He was
um,
holding it in. He wasn't complaining, was he? He was just
no,
going about his daily life. He didn't come up to you whining all the time and saying, "Mum, I'm sick," or
he
anything. He
he
just
just
lived
he
his
just
life.
didn't have that spark. Like, as I said,
Yeah.
he
You
was
could
my
tell there was something
mischievous pug, and he to be honest, I think I said something like, "He hasn't been naughty in 4 weeks." Like, that is
wrong.
just like, usually it's a rubbish bin or the pillows off the couch or just something. That was always his way of letting you know that he was bored or he didn't like what was going on or whatever else. And so I just, when he hasn't been naughty in 4 weeks, there's just something not right. And so I was just, as I was reading that part of the book, I thought to myself, oh my God, that just definitely sinks in for me. The other thing that we were talking about, like learning to interpret behavior, and that it's, I've got to remember what you actually said. If I could find the actual quote, it was something like, oh no, there, it's not intuitive. You have to learn it.
Absolutely. It's because it comes back to anthropomorphism again. Our intuition is to try and see human-like behavior, body language in dogs, and to read it as though they're a human. And it works for some things, but it doesn't work for others. Like, for example, if a dog's mouth's open and you can see its teeth, they're not smiling and they're not happy. They're not trying to greet you. And they could be panting. They might be open mouth breathing. They might be growling. It could be a range of things that they could be doing. Smiling is another obvious example that people do know, thankfully, understand that smiling, showing your front teeth, that's often a dog baring its teeth, showing its teeth is a sign, it's a warning sign, as a lot of you would know. And so, like, yeah, that's a common example that everyone would know, but there's probably a whole bunch that a lot of your listeners might not know that are actually also incorrectly anthropomorphized by people a lot. And one of them is the whole smiling thing. When you see a dog
Yeah.
panting with their mouth open, their tongue out, it looks like a smile. I can see it too because I've got a human brain. I can see how it looks like a smile. But dogs don't interpret it that way, and they don't mean it that way when they do that. It has other meanings and other reasons. So if a dog has its mouth open and it's got its tongue out, watch its breathing. Its breathing rate is gonna be double at least what its normal breathing rate is because they're open mouth breathing, they're panting. They might be hot, they might have just been exercising, they might be doing it because they're stressed or anxious, and they might be even doing it because 'cause they're in discomfort. So, there's a range of different reasons, and that's it, like, there's no other reason other than that. It's not like they might be happy as well, that's not on the list.
I have to admit, growing up, I was taught, look at the dog's eyes.
Mm,
That was always the first indication if they were being aggressive.
mm,
Um, it was always, do they have kind, for want of a better term, do they have kind eyes, or
right,
are they showing? Is there something in their eyes that is telling you that something's not quite right?
mm,
And then that was the first indicator, and then look at everything else. Look at the tail, look at the stance, are the hackles up, all that sort of stuff. But it's quite interesting because with pugs, obviously, even when they've had the Boaz surgery to help with their breathing, when they get when they get excited about something or they get themselves worked up, they still look like they're smiling. And it's
yeah,
one of the things where I've always looked at them thinking to myself, are you overheating? I can see your tail going a mile a minute, and I can see that you're a little bit worked up and you're panting. I can see in your eyes that you're not looking anxious. And it's always one of those things where I've just sort of like I've tried to put all of the bits together and hope that I'm not anthropomorphizing now that I know what the word is.
mm,
Um, or am I putting them into a situation where I need to actually be pulling them out? Do I need to take their dress off? Because, I mean, I have to admit, Rosie, my old girl, she likes getting dressed up because it gets her all the attention in the world. But her birthday party last year, nobody had arrived except for the porty planner who was setting everything up. And for some reason, she knew that it was all about her. And I swear to God, I thought she was hyperventilating. She was just, there was so much going. And I ended up having to pick her up and take her inside and set her down and settle it down because I was just sort of like, it's okay, puppy. Yes, it is all for
Yep.
you.
Yeah.
Um,
I think she quite possibly was hyperventilating and anxious, and it's worth noting that just like a bit of anxiety, like it's okay. We all get anxious sometimes, but
mm,
you just it's really important to be able to see that they're anxious, right? Because
mm,
like what you did exactly that. You took her out of the situation, you gave her a break, which is really good. And one of the thing with pugs specifically that I forgot to mention is that airway disease can cause panting as well, obviously, if they just
yes.
can't get enough oxygen in. But that would be all the time. So, as hopefully your pug, when they're in a calm state, they can breathe without having to open their mouth and pant constantly. Hopefully, they can breathe with their mouth closed because that's important for them to be comfortable and healthy. But yes, certainly pugs do pant when they're anxious. They can pant when they've been exercising. They can pant when it's hot, and they can pant when they're in discomfort as well. So it's got to be one of them. And so if you're at the moment inside and your pug's walking around and it's 18 degrees inside and your pug is not exercising and they're panting, they probably are a bit worried about something, right? And you just got to
Yes.
try and figure out what it is.
It's like the process of elimination. I
Yeah,
suppose it is like literally
it
talking to a
is.
6-month-old baby. What is it? Do you want to be fed? Do you want to
Yeah.
bark? Do you want
Yeah.
Maybe I need to do one of those skits. Put a pug in a pram and say, "What is it that you want?"
Yeah. And
I do
another one
think
with
that
pugs actually is I've seen on social media before. You know how some pugs, I don't know if you have a name for it, they make a squealing, screaming noise sometimes when they're really
they're
like
about
up.
to get their nails cut.
Yep. Yeah.
I know. I hate it.
Yeah. So I've heard some people say that the pug's just being, really over dramatic or something like that. But different breeds, they deal with their stress in different ways. And one of the things that some pugs do is they make that squeal, that
Mm,
scream, whatever you want to call it. And they do that when they're stressed and unhappy. And other breeds get just as stressed and unhappy as pugs do, but they don't make that noise. And
yep.
so I think pugs are just good communicators in that
They're very
situation.
expressive.
And they're good at letting you know because I think they are really upset in that situation. They're not being over dramatic. They're not just putting on a show and being a drama queen, as I've heard people say it. It's important not to minimize. In other breeds, it happens in all breeds. People say, "Oh, look at that dog trembling, quivering. They're being such a sook. They're putting it all on." And their dogs don't know how to fake and act like
No.
that. At least, look, they can over time learn, but the first few times it's for real, for sure, unless you start reinforcing it accidentally by giving them lots of attention when they do it. But then even then it's difficult because they'll be doing it for real sometimes. And if they've learnt, they can learn to do things like tremble and pant for attention and for treats. But it is rare as well as the other thing I'll say. Like if your dog's doing that, it's not common. I really doubt that if you have a dog doing these things that they are putting it on, despite no matter how much you say you think they are. Because I've had that many clients and that many owners tell me that, oh, they think their dog's just, they're just acting up because
Manipulating them.
they're manipulating them. And I look at the dog, I'm like, nah, I can tell when a dog's manipulating you, and I know that that is real. And I have to break it to them very gently and say, look, and explain why I think that it's real. And even though I do occasionally see dogs acting and pretending, but they weren't the dogs when they do pretend, they're not doing it because they consciously understand and can lie like we do. They're not thinking, "Oh, I know that if I act like this way, that will make you feel worried for me, and so I'll get special attention."
Mm.
That they've figured it out in a much more basic way. In the past, when they've been trembling, their parents have come to their parents have come to them and given them pats and cuddles, and they really want pats and cuddles, so they might learn to do it then. But it's very rare. I'll just say.
And it's what you had in the book was a good first impression really matters in all of these situations because it then sets them up to be more comfortable in the long run. So it definitely like I think about I think there was something in the book where you said about we weren't going to cover it, but it kind of sits well here where there was research around the fact that the dogs understand emotion like from the womb because it's what's around them and then when they're born they also understand it in their immediate environment. Like, they
Yeah, I
sense
think
it. Sorry, I think is the word I think.
yeah, so I think, the part of the book you're referring to there is the part where I'm talking about how emotional experiences can actually be transferred from mother to pups, I
Yes,
believe. Yeah, yeah.
which was
But
just
it's pretty amazing. It's, a
I
whole
was
field of genetics and epigenetics, which is it's kind of like do you know there's studies that have looked at a male mouse. They've taken male mice in the laboratory and they've stressed them out just horribly. I don't know how they did it. It's definitely something that's not very nice. But
no.
they've stressed them out and then they've used their sperm and AI in fertilized some female mice and then measured the stress levels in those offspring, increased stress levels. And then again, the next generation down with a normal father, they can still detect a slight effect. Right? So something happened in that original mouse that got stressed out that changed the DNA in their
Makeup.
sperm. Not permanently changed, but it's called, methylation is one way. It's called epigenetics. So essentially it sort of like alters the way that, yeah, the offspring perceive stress for the rest of their life. So, yeah, you can go through the generations. It's quite incredible. And so it actually does apply a lot to rescue dogs and, the pug rescues that you see because some of them, they come to you, you don't know their past at all.
No.
It may be that they were traumatized in the home before you got them, that they've been through something really stressful and they were abused. It also may be that the parents were, you know, puppy farm dogs
Yeah.
and had a horrible life and were incredibly stressed. And then this puppy that you've got was born already having a lot of difficulties. And the first owners just couldn't deal with how difficult the dog was because of how anxious they were all the time. And so
Yeah.
they may not have even been traumatized. It may be that they were born with generational trauma, essentially, that couldn't be treated and dealt with properly in the first home that was maybe too naive, not didn't understand pugs well enough, couldn't
Mm.
cater to them well enough. And so it's yeah, definitely very relevant in your sort of line of work.
It definitely like, Kenji was used for breeding until its back he was paralyzed, he had a cyst on his spine, and he's on fluoxetine, and the difference of Kenji when he come to live with us 18 months ago to the Kenji that we have now, we barely notice because obviously he's with us all the time. It's incredible when people who saw him 18 months ago see him and go, "Oh my God, I can't believe the difference." But I still see behavior in him, especially around meal times where I go, I know that that's because you were used for breeding and there is something that obviously went on during feeding time because he gets quite aggressive. He's never food aggressive at any other time. Treats, he is so gentle, except when it comes to dinner time, and then he's a completely different pug. And after having read your book, I thought to myself, God, there is obviously something that happened in his last environment that and I'm not even sure how I'm going to make that a better because I think to myself, my God, what must have been like with him not being on fluoxetine? If this is what he's like on it, in a safe environment where he's learned that over the last 18 months that he is okay and that he has a really good life and all the treaties in the world and pushy beds and all that sort of stuff, that he's still what emotion must he feel to have this reaction? Because kind of that was what one of the things I got out of your
Mm.
book was that that sort of reaction is seems to be emotional.
Definitely, yeah, definitely emotional. And emotional reactions are the hardest to change, the hardest to train, the hardest to get rid of. And yeah, so we'll never know what happened, but it sounds pretty terrible. Like from what you're saying, that something pretty bad must have happened to him to cause that. Absolutely.
So, and it's definitely what I simply think, how am I just going to have to accept that this is a part of him that we will try and make as safe a part of his life that's always as safe as we can make it, but he is always going to have that reaction. It's definitely it's something that I've been mulling over the last few weeks, especially sort of knowing that we were going to have this chat. And it kind of that leads into the next question where you were in your book, you're talking about the fact their sense of smell. This would be the next thing that blew my mind as I was reading in the book it didn't surprise me that their olfactory bulb was larger than a human's. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was that they could smell emotions on other animals. That was just like, oh my God. Like, I just assumed that my pugs were super intuitive and they knew when I was upset. I didn't realize that they could actually smell it on me.
Absolutely. I think it's already well established, yeah, in a range of species that animals can smell the the things that come out of a body when an emotion is felt. So there's a whole range of things like sweating. This change of the smell and the sweat can change. The amount of sweat that is released can change as well. And there's also the stress hormones that can be smelt as well. So there's a whole range of different things that can be detected across even across species. Some of them are the same, some of them are species specific. But I think that it's debatable how many of those scents dogs just know instinctively are actually caused by stress and fear or happiness or, emotions. And at the same time, some of them may not be known instinctively. They may be just figured out by the dog as they get older. So they may start to realize that, when after, mum and dad yell at each other, the house smells different. I can smell some different smells whenever they yell. I don't like it when they yell, and then I smell a different smell in the house because they can pick up so much detail in the smell. They can start to make those associations themselves. They don't actually have to necessarily even know it instinctively. And then if they smell that smell on its own, they might be like, "Oh, that's the smell like when mum and dad fight. I know that smell. That smells different." And so it's amazing to think about how intuitive they can be because yeah, the level of detail that they can smell, like the number of compounds that they can smell is just mind blowing. It's a world that we'll never actually understand properly because we can't experience it ourselves properly. It's like trying to explain, what something looks like to someone that's blind. It's just, I mean, you can try your hardest and there's probably a really good way of doing it, but I think it'll be difficult, like very difficult. And it's like another dimension almost. Yeah.
No, I agree. There are times when my pugs can smell things out and start eating it off the ground before I've even realized that they've actually found possum poop. Ugh.
They're so good at pretending it's a normal smell too. Like they sniff like, "Oh, yeah, doo, doo, doo,
Oh,
doo, doo. I'm
I'm
just
just
smelling a
off on my
normal
little
smell."
safari and
Yeah.
possum poo. And it was just when you described it in the book, the thing that popped in my mind was the way Rosie, my girl, at times, it's so funny how she does it. We'll go to the groomers, same groomers we've been to for years, and we'll go through the door. And some days she'll go through, she'll toddle through, she's all happy. And then other days she'll get to the door and she will put the skids on. And now I think to myself, I wonder if she can smell another dog that just
That's what
is
it'll
not
be.
okay.
Definitely, yeah. So some days it's gonna smell more like fear and anxiety than other days when it's gonna be better. And see the same in the vet clinic as
But
well.
yes.
Some days you have multiple patients in a row that will not go into the room. They will not enter it. And then other days, they're all fine. It's
I
just
it's
they're picking up on something that we're not seeing. And yeah, it's smell.
it's yeah, it's sort of that was the when I read that, I just went, "Oh," because I used to think to myself, "What is wrong with your girlfriend?" Like, seriously.
I know,
You
right?
you
It's like,
were
what's
happy
wrong?
coming in here 2 weeks ago, and now you're not. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? This is the place where you come out smelling pretty. I would assume that you'd be really happy with that. Just
Oh,
insane. So I just sort of thought, "Oh, I'm going to." I mean, like, the vet, I kind of understand, like, there's a
yeah.
lot of dogs that go in and out, all that sort of thing, but,
No, the
um
groomer can be very scary for some dogs, really scary.
yes,
And also they do express those little anal glands out. I think pugs
yes,
get problems with them a bit, and a lot of
yes.
breeds do, honestly. But yeah, I think, did you know that a dog can, when they're really scared, they will express their own?
I read that
Yeah.
and it's same thing again, Rosie does it,
Yeah.
um, random times, and I used to just think that it was something that she did, like she was having a bit of a leakage or something, but when you were talking about the fact that they do it when they feel fear, because she would do it randomly, but only when she was sleeping on my lap, and all I could think was and she loves sleeping on my lap, so, like, deliberately, like, gets on the couch and then pushes everybody else away
Mm.
to get onto my lap, so I know that it's not it's not me forcing her to sleep on my
No,
lap, but
that doesn't sound like fear to me.
there are times when
Mm,
like, I'm in my office
mm.
and she'll paw at my leg, and that is, "I wanna get up and sleep on your lap," and I wonder if those times it's been because I've got a rolly chair and I've moved, that movement has actually scared her, and then that's what's caused her to have a bit of an express.
It's possible. I think it depends, like, you know, depends on a lot of things. I think it depends how full they are to begin with. Leakage is definitely a thing as well when they're just overfull and they just leak out.
Yeah.
And it depends on the dog. So I think some dogs they might express easier than others, but generally speaking, the amount of fear they've got to feel to fully like express their anal glands out fully is quite severe.
Okay.
So we're talking about like at the vet clinic when a dog is, if I've seen a dog that they've been handled and been put through something really, really stressful, that's the kind of situation where you'll be like, oh, they did their anal glands, like they fully expressed themselves.
Yeah.
And it's always at a time when I already felt very bad for the dog. I thought this dog is, in some situations, you have to put them through a bit of stress when they're sick and you
Because
try and
for
minimize
their
it
well-being.
as much, yeah, for their well-being. And you try and minimize it. And there's just sometimes the worst of the worst cases where you can't help it and you got to hold them down to give them an injection to sedate them so you can look them over or something.
Yeah.
And then that can be enough to just cause them to, yeah, express their anal glands out through fear. It's actually the same as like a skunk. So
Mm,
a skunk, when they're really scared as well, they'll let off a stink bomb and that's their anal glands. It's the same. It is the anal glands. It's the
yes.
same anatomical like structure in different species. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if in the grooming parlor, just the groomer squeezing them out and the smell of that everywhere could
Yeah.
be also something that reminds the dog that, hey, that could be a sign of fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, just fascinating. Just
Mm.
as I say, every
Different world of smelly butt glands and smelling pee, all this disgusting stuff that they seem to love. It's
I know.
crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, as I said, possum poo, the most
Yeah,
disgusting thing I've ever
yeah.
seen. But my rescue Roxy loves the stuff. I was like, look
Yeah.
at her go, "Oh, why?" And her farts reek because of it. So believe me, it's
Not their most charming trait.
I know, but you love them anyway. So the next thing I want to talk about was emotional learning. So we've kind of alluded to it. We've been talking
Mm,
about it a little bit, but
mm,
and I, as I said before, I've been trying this out around home. So the talk about operant learning first. It's probably we'll go that way.
yeah, so when you think about training a dog and teaching them stuff, most people think about like teaching sit and stay and drop and roll over. And they're all things where the dog decides to do something and it uses its muscles to do it. Like they decide to put their bottom down, or they decide to lie down. And that is called operant learning. It's kind of like they're deciding to operate their body and deciding what to do. But there's a big difference between that and emotional learning, because with emotional learning, that's like learning to be scared of something or learning to enjoy something or having a change in how your emotions respond to something in the world. And that's a very different process of learning because it's not under your voluntary control. And so with operant learning, like teaching a dog to sit, the dog can decide to sit and you can give them a treat. And then they remember, okay, I get a treat when I sit and when you say the word sit. And so they learn to decide to sit when you give them the cue.
Yeah.
So they learn to decide because they know they're going to get a good outcome. You can't decide to feel happy or sad like you can decide to sit down, like as a person, even. Like it's not the same process. We get so used to just our emotions, I think, just not being changeable or alterable. We just assume that they are, but actually you can train them in people and in dogs. And in people, it's called like, systemic desensitization or cognitive behavioral therapy that you can get at
Yeah.
your psychologist and they can train your emotions. So if you have got, a phobia of spiders, for example, there are places where you can pay to go to see a psychologist and they will train your emotions so that when you see a spider, you literally don't feel any fear. Like the fear's gone. And that is emotional learning. And it is very difficult and very different to training operantly and training sit and stay on your dog. And so many people, I think, when they think of they see their dog having behavioral issues, like, for example, their dog's barking at other dogs on leash, for example, and so they think that they need operant training. They think they need to train their dog, just like sit and stay and that kind of training,
Yeah.
when really the problem is their dog's fearful of other dogs and they're barking because 'cause they're scared.
Yes.
And actually, what we need is not training a dog how to decide to do something, because they're not even deciding to bark. They're barking out
It's
of
a
an
reaction.
instinct. It's just a reaction. Yeah. It's not like they think, "Oh, should I bark? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's bark," and then let it out. It just
It's my way to communicate that I am not happy with this situation. That was sort of how
absolutely.
I saw it.
Yeah, it's almost like crying. Like, you don't decide to cry. It just happens and you can't help it when it happens.
Yep.
So it's a bit like that. And so, yeah, that's why it's important to make that distinction between the two, because a lot of people, when they've got these really serious, difficult cases, they think they need to go to a trainer and they think the kind of training they need is operant training. And some trainers would agree with them and not understand what's going on. The good ones will understand that yeah, operant training is really useful in so many situations, and it's fun and it's rewarding and the dog enjoys it, but it might not be what's needed for some of those behavior issues.
And I had read your book before this circumstance I'm now going to talk about had actually occurred. And I was actually really angry with the owner. A guy that lives down the road has a dog and a rescue, and has been to I don't know what it was called, but basically it sounded to me like angry dog training. So the dog had obviously had a terrible background, and then he'd spent considerable amount of time training this dog so that the dog could go for walks and interact with other people and all those sort of things. And generally, we don't cross paths. He walks at a different time of the day as to what I do with the pugs. And then there's one time we did actually cross paths, and my two backed off because they've been around this dog before and they don't. And he was a few meters away, and Roxy, my rescue, she backed off having seen Rosie and Kenji do it. But Wally, who we'd only had, I think, for about 2 months, he was just sort of like, oh, I just want to go up and have a look. And so I had his lead quite tight because I was like, puppy, I'm not sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And this guy said to me, he said, oh, look, he's had all this training. She's really good. Do you mind if they just have a bit of a sniff? And so I went, yep, okay. Wally looks like he's happy, because I was thinking to myself, body language is suggesting that he's okay. So I just sort of said, yep, that's fine. And then I just kept a tight hold because he's in a harness, so I can yank him back if it gets bad.
Mm.
And this dog sort of approached, had 2 sniffs and started to snarl. And so I reefed Wally back, and then he grabbed his dog and made it do some sort of twirl or something and then sit down. And then he looked up at me and said, I'm so sorry. Like, this is, he had a really bad interaction with a pug a couple of weeks ago. And I stood there with my mouth agape because all I could think was, this dog's had an emotional response. That was the first thing that come to mind
Mm.
to this pug. And I went, and now I know why. Would have been a key piece of information that you should have told me before you asked to approach my pugs.
Absolutely.
Like, I felt really sorry for that dog, because then he asked me if he'd allow me to have his dog come close to my pugs again. I was like, no. I actually turned around and I walked off. I just walked the other way and walked away. I thought, I am not exposing my pugs to a dog who is quite clearly not comfortable with pugs.
No, and that dog doesn't wanna be exposed to
No.
the pugs either. Obviously, he's saying he's not happy if he's snarling and wants to be kept right away. So, that's not gonna give that dog any help at all. It's not gonna learn from that being forced, or allowed to be close to pugs to the point where it's snarling. It's not gonna learn to suddenly be okay with pugs through that kind of exposure. That's what we'd call an example where exposure is not necessarily helpful.
Mhm.
And if it's to the point where the dog is snarling or barking, then that's not an exposure that we're going to see over time, that the dog's going to get used to it and become okay with it. That's a kind of exposure where we can often see things get worse over time. So, yeah, it's with emotional learning and emotional training, that's a big mistake that a lot of owners make, is that they want to get their dog to make a lot of improvement and get used to something. And so they expose it to that thing to get them used to it. But yeah, it doesn't always work that way. So yeah, I think a lot more detail in my book if you want that than we
Yes.
could go over today.
Oh,
But yeah,
absolutely.
essentially, I'd say that yeah, it's best to play it really safe and not expose your dog if they're aggressive unless you really know what you're doing. And you probably would want to have a professional trainer help you do that as well, because chances are you'll make a mistake. Most owners do. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to admit, the next day, I actually walked the Puggies back past that part of the road and then gave them treats. And I
Oh,
was,
good.
because I just remembering in your book that one of the things was make the experience positive.
Mm,
And I thought this was a path we walked every other day. So I thought I
mm,
can't. And so I thought I'll walk back, have them sit, have them sniff around the area, gave them some treats, gave them some cuddles and things.
yep.
And amazingly, Wally was just sort of like, well, I'm not going to say no to the treats, but I don't know what all the fuss is. Like he was just, it was water off a pug's back in his instance. But I did think to myself, how would Kenji feel because he's always a little bit anxious and Roxy's the same.
Mm,
And I just it was just incredible. I just could not believe the fact that everything that you said just pinged in my or I should say in your book, pinged in
mm,
my mind, and I thought not that I don't think that I wouldn't have done something to make sure that they were safe even if I hadn't read your book, but definitely understanding the other dog's perspective,
mm,
made me react a lot quicker and then do the best thing for both that
mm.
dog and my
Yeah.
pugs in just saying, "This requires distance.
Yes.
This is sort of."
Absolutely.
And it did make me think to my it was what did you call it? A self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Yep.
If you keep exposing the dog to a negative environment, you're actually not doing
Yeah.
help.
Exactly right. So kind of think like if you want to get out, like if you're at school and you're getting bullied by another bully and it's traumatizing you, and by a bully, sorry, not another bully, and it's traumatizing you. And if you want to get over that and you want to be happy at school again, repeatedly being bullied at school is not going to help you be okay with it. Like it's
Be
just
a resilient
it's
person.
it's it's just a really horrible experience to go through, and putting yourself through it over and over again, that's actually repeated trauma, right?
Yes.
That's that reinforcing negative feedback loop of, like, just things are just gonna keep getting worse, they're not gonna get better. And another thing that comes to mind is, like, if you keep trying something and it's not working, then continuing to keep trying is not a good idea, right?
Is it the definition of insanity?
Yep, exactly.
Dennis, thank you so much. It's been an incredible hour, and there is so many more things that we could talk about that was in the book. But I think if we went any further, it would spoil it for anybody who actually does want to read it. And I cannot recommend that they do just on based on my experiences alone. So the key thing is how do people find it and how do they find you?
Right, yes. So, thank you for that. That's, very generous and nice of you to have that feedback, but I think that the best way for people to find it is to just search my name, and then for a book that I've written, it's the only one I've written, so Dennis Wormald, a dog behavior veterinarian, and the book name is A Dedication to Difficult Dogs, and it shouldn't be hard to find. It's available online in a bunch of different stores, including Amazon and some others, so you can get it delivered. And yeah, I definitely recommend that. I think that, we've gone over a lot today, but,
Hmm, there's
that
a
book,
lot more in the
everything
book.
there's a lot more in the book, and also even the stuff we did go over, it's written very precisely and correctly. I'm taking a long time making sure that it's written just as accurately as possible,
Yeah.
and so it'll be there'll be more depth to everything that we've said there as well. So yeah, I think definitely worth it. And yeah, I'm really thankful, Donna, that you've read it and that it's helped you so much. I think one thing it's done for you is that it's given you some really good fundamental understanding and common sense around it, which is something that is really lacking in society. And I think that more people like you, that will just be amazing. That's what we need. Absolutely what we need. So that's where the book is. You can also follow me on Twitter, or X, it's called now, at Dennis Wormald. And I do post regularly on there, lots of interesting stuff about different dog videos and stuff like that. So yeah, you're welcome to follow me there. Or yeah, that's pretty much it.
That is awesome, and I will make sure all of your contact details and various socials are also in the comments section of our podcast, just to make it a little bit easier for our readers. Um,
Perfect.
Dennis, thank you so much for your time. It has been absolutely incredible, and I'm so glad I got the opportunity to gush about your book. to you as opposed to everybody else that I talk to on a daily
Thank you very
basis.
much. Thank you very
Um,
much. It's been wonderful being on here. It's been really good chatting to you. Yeah.
no, thank you. And hopefully we'll be able to get you back on when you do your next book.
Yeah, sounds good. Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Now, this is a longer than usual episode for us, but I think you can agree that it was worth it. I'm reading the book for the second time. I enjoyed it so much, and I will share with you some of my aha moments / successes in our next episode and over in our Facebook group, Living the Pug Life. So see you over there, and if you've also read Dennis's book, I'd love to hear what you thought of it and if you've tried any of the emotional training techniques yourself. Now, if you liked the episode or think someone else might enjoy it, please share it and leave a review with your favourite podcast host so more Pug Pawrents can find us and join in with the fun. It only takes a couple of seconds to give us a 5-star review, and it goes a long way to helping other Pug Pawrents find us. So until next time, Puggies, thank you for joining us. Have a pawsome week, and humans, be generous with the snackies.